John Mitchell sat quietly at the counter of Riverbend truck stop, sipping his third cup of coffee. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The peaceful atmosphere was only interrupted by the rumble of passing trucks. It was an ordinary evening, or so it seemed. As soon as John heard the roar of motorcycles entering the lot, he knew something was wrong. The engines revved loudly on purpose, designed to disrupt the calm. He didn't immediately look up but kept his focus on the route maps in front of him, his mind already shifting gears. He had spent years in the military, in special forces, training himself to sense trouble before it started. He saw the bikers dismount and walk through the door. Both were wearing leather vests with the unmistakable Thunder Riders MC patches. John's mind worked quickly. He recognized the pattern. Gangs marking new territory. Intimidation first. Then, things would escalate. Lily Thompson, the waitress, walked over to refill his cup. Her hand trembled slightly as she approached, and she met his eyes with a look of concern. "They're here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They're just here to talk, Lily." "Keep calm," John reassured her. He didn't need to raise his voice, but there was an authority in his tone that made her feel more at ease. As the bikers entered, the atmosphere in the diner immediately shifted. Ray, the taller of the two, swaggered in first, his cold eyes scanning the room. Viper, younger but no less dangerous, followed closely behind. As they walked in, a few customers tensed, and a father instinctively moved closer to shield his wife and young daughter. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Ray drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Nice setup you got here." His eyes turned to Bella Morrison, the owner of Riverbend Truck Stop, who stepped out of the kitchen. Her expression remained neutral, but John noticed her hand subtly sliding beneath the counter where she kept a baseball bat. "Welcome to Riverbend. What can I get you gentlemen?" Bella asked, keeping her voice steady. Viper smirked, leaning against the counter. "How about everything in the register for starters?" The few remaining customers, a couple of truckers and a family of 3, tensed up. The father instinctively moved to protect his wife and child. Ray laughed darkly, placing a hand on Viper's shoulder. "Easy, brother. We're just here to talk business." John, still studying his maps, could feel the tension rising. He had seen this playbook before, both in the Marines and later during counter-narcotics operations. Small-time gangs always started with intimidation, establishing fear before moving on to protection rackets and drugs. Bella's voice remained calm. "This is a family business. We don't need protection." Ray chuckled, his voice growing darker. "Everybody needs protection. Bad things happen to businesses that don't understand that. Equipment breaks down, supplies go missing, customers have accidents." Viper wandered over to the family's table, deliberately bumping the chair of the young girl. She whimpered, clutching her mother's arm. That's when John spoke up. "The lady said she's not interested." The diner fell silent. Ray turned slowly, finally noticing John. Well, looks like we got ourselves a hero," he sneered, walking toward the counter to loom over John. "This ain't your business, old man." John didn't flinch. He simply looked up, meeting Ray's gaze. "It is now." Ray leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "Who do you think you are?" John's voice remained even. "Just a guy trying to enjoy his coffee. But I've got a pretty good idea who you are. Thunder Riders MC, trying to expand your territory from Texas. You start with intimidation at truck stops, then move to protection rackets and, eventually, drugs." Ray squinted, sizing him up. "You know a lot about it." "I know enough to tell you you're making a mistake," John replied calmly, not showing any tension. He took another sip of his coffee. Viper's hand hovered near his belt, but he hesitated. Something in John's tone, the utter certainty in his voice, gave him pause. Ray studied John more closely, noticing the way John carried himself with military precision, the way he controlled his space. "You're making a mistake," Ray said, his voice filled with doubt now. He backed away slowly, still watching John. "We'll be back." John didn't reply. Instead, he returned to his maps, his posture relaxed as though nothing had happened. The bikers turned and left the diner, their attempts at intimidation faltering in the face of John's calm resistance. That night, John didn't rest. He knew the Thunder Riders would return, probably with reinforcements. He wasn't about to let them push around his community. He picked up the phone, making calls to truckers he knew, veterans like himself, who would stand with him. The next morning, John sat at the counter, watching as familiar faces began filtering in. Big Dave, a former Army Ranger now driving trucks, was one of the first to show up, his massive presence calming the atmosphere. Doc Taylor, a combat medic, joined them shortly after. Word spread fast, and soon, the truck stop was buzzing with energy. Lily approached with a fresh pot of coffee, her hands steady now. "Looks like it's going to be a busy day," she remarked, setting the cup in front of John. John nodded. "They'll be back, and when they do, we'll be ready." Late in the afternoon, John's instincts proved correct. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, and this time, they came in force. Ray led the charge, flanked by Viper and several other bikers. They entered the diner, clearly trying to intimidate everyone with their numbers. Big Dave, Doc Taylor, and the rest of the veteran truckers didn't flinch. They had been through worse. The Thunder Riders walked in with swagger, but they didn't realize that the people in the diner weren't just ordinary truckers. These were men and women who had served in wars, who had been through hell and back. They weren't afraid. Ray took a step toward John, his hand resting on the handle of his knife. "You really think you can stop this, old man?" he sneered. John stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Ray's. "I'm not trying to stop you. I'm trying to show you that Riverbend isn't yours to take. It belongs to this community." The tension in the diner was palpable as the bikers took their positions. They started knocking things over, making their dominance known. But John's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady. "This is your last warning. Leave now, or this ends badly for all of you." At that moment, the trap was sprung. The lights flashed on, blinding the bikers, and the veterans moved into action. They fought with military precision, neutralizing the threat quickly. The bikers were caught off guard, overwhelmed by the coordinated resistance. Sheriff Cooper, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally stepped forward. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice firm. The bikers, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned, dropped their weapons. The sirens of approaching police vehicles could be heard in the distance. With the bikers arrested and the situation under control, John and his community could finally breathe easy. But John knew this was just the beginning. They had to take down the Thunder Riders' entire network. The next few days saw a flurry of activity. Federal agents swooped in, arresting corrupt officials, shutting down drug distribution hubs, and collecting evidence that would bring down the whole operation. John and his community were the cornerstone of this effort. They had shown the world what happens when people stand up to organized crime. A month later, Riverbend Truck Stop was no longer just a quiet stop on the highway. It had become a symbol of resistance. The story of how a small community, led by a quiet veteran, had taken down a criminal empire spread across the country. John sat at his usual spot at the counter, watching the community thrive. The veterans, the truckers, and the local families had all come together to protect their home. It wasn't about one man defeating a gang. It was about a community standing united. As the sun set on Riverbend, John smiled to himself. He knew this victory would inspire others, and he knew that, no matter what came next, Riverbend would always be ready. 1 month after the Thunder Riders were taken down, Riverbend Truck Stop had returned to something resembling normalcy. The heavy presence of federal agents had diminished, but the lessons learned from the confrontation were still fresh in the minds of everyone in the community. John sat at his usual spot at the counter, sipping his coffee, as he watched a mix of regular truckers and federal agents going about their business. The trucks were back, and the air of tension had all but disappeared. It was a peaceful day, but the atmosphere felt different now. There was a newfound confidence in the air, a sense of security that hadn't existed before. John knew that this victory wasn't the end. There would always be new challenges, new threats that would rise. But the people of Riverbend had learned something important. When they stood together, they were strong enough to face anything. They weren't just defending a truck stop anymore. They were defending their way of life. As the day went on, John's phone buzzed with messages. The momentum from the battle they had fought was far from over. Other communities, inspired by Riverbend's stand, were beginning to take action, organizing their own defenses and standing up to the criminal organizations that had tried to control them. John looked up at the window, watching the sun begin to set. He didn't know what would come next, but he was ready for it. Riverbend had become more than just a stop on the highway. It had become a symbol of resistance, a place where people had come together to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. As the evening drew near, a group of bikers passed through the parking lot. This time, however, they weren't the Thunder Riders. They were part of a new coalition of veterans, banding together to protect the highways and ensure no one would ever terrorize their communities again. Bella, the truck stop owner, came over with a fresh pot of coffee. "Think we'll ever face anything like that again?" she asked, looking around at the growing crowd of truckers and veterans now gathered at the stop. John smiled slightly. "Someone will always try, but now we know how to handle it." The sun was setting on another day at Riverbend truck stop. The battle was over, but the legacy of the stand they had taken would live on for years to come. They had shown that sometimes, when you target the wrong veteran at the wrong truck stop, you don't just lose a fight, you lose everything.